Lori, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Ali, thanks so much for having me. I'm very excited to sit down and have this chat with you.
Oh, it's a real pleasure. We appreciate you joining us. Happy New Year to you. We're kicking off the new year with an awesome podcast. So great to have you on. Just as a way of introductions, Lori is the CEO of Four Eyes Financial, which is a software company focused on the financial industry, obviously, as the name speaks for itself. So please, Lori, just love to hear a bit about your background and a little bit about your story.
Great. So one of the reasons I'm so happy to be here having this conversation with you, Ali, is because although I'm the CEO of a technology company in financial services, if you look back at my history, there's nothing really that would lead you to this endpoint. And so I think, as I understand, a lot of your listenership are people that are young people that are thinking about their career, they're thinking about what comes next, they're thinking about, wouldn't it be nice to hear about someone who's maybe been around a little bit longer, done some things, and what was that experience like for them? So,
Yeah.
and so, my story is a bit of a journey. All the pieces connect, but I think the sort of core themes are that I'm an entrepreneur. My professional life has been determined by understanding what's important to myself and really wanting to help make some kind of change or impact in the world. And in fact, I studied political science at university, and I had an ambition to change the world by getting involved some way and in government or some sort of governance or NGOs, that kind of world. And I discovered fairly quickly as I got out into the workforce. Actually, one of my first jobs out of university was at a First Nation, and as an economic development officer. And during that time, I probably had the most learning in that 1 year than I had the subsequent 5 years after that. And I learned a couple things that were important for me personally in terms of what I wanted to do next and how I might be able to make a difference in the world. And one is I learned about politics and bureaucracy from a micro level because it was a small organization, but it's still a government, and it still has impacts as larger governments do. And so my learning was maybe I can make a difference more quickly and more directly, personally, in business. And so I made a conscious change to move into business. And subsequently, there's some long stories there, but I ended up running 2 different consulting companies, working with multinational companies in the area of improvement, strategy, and business development. And one of my clients actually was Scotia Wealth, and I worked with a number of their entities from their kind of broker-dealer, to their high net worth division inside the business, to their family office. And through that experience, I learned and I saw a lot of opportunities, again, for improving things for retail investors. And I was, as a business owner, an investor myself. Fortunately, my partner in life is the technology side of Four Eyes Financial. And so, he's an entrepreneur, and we would just sit around talking about how could we make things better. And as entrepreneurs, we said, well, let's stop talking about it. Let's start building some stuff. And, what is interesting for me is the purpose of Four Eyes Financial 5 years ago was to help retail investors feel more confident that they are invested in products that meet their risk tolerance and their financial goals. But our product has evolved and changed quite dramatically to achieve that end. And it always gives me some comfort, though, to look back and say, but we're still on track.
Right. That's actually a really interesting point, and I want to focus on that for a minute, because Embedded in what you just said to me is one of the most critical aspects of not only running a business, but just your day-to-day life. And that idea of being adaptable, because sometimes you find that like you guys had a vision, here's the product, here's what we're trying to achieve. And when you started, you realize, oh, you know, the way we're going to achieve this has to change, and you've adapted accordingly. Sometimes I find that, especially with you know, sometimes young individuals make this mistake where they get too focused on a particular path and they just want to go down that path no matter what, as opposed to taking a step back and thinking, okay, like, what is the problem that I'm trying to solve here, instead of being too focused on the solution. Like the story that I love telling is when they first went to space, I don't know if this is the true story or not, but they realized that their pens don't work in zero gravity. So apparently the Americans spent millions of dollars and they developed the zero gravity pen, and the Russians used pencils. And so that's sort of like, I don't know if that's a true story. It's probably not.
It's a great story.
But yeah, that's the idea, is like, don't be too focused on the solution. The solution is the pen, and the pen doesn't work. You don't have to fix the pen. Think about what the problem is. The problem is you need to write. So just use a pencil. And
Yeah.
so that is really something that I talk about all the time for any of the people that reach out to me, and we talk all the time. That's a big part of the conversations, is trying to shift the focus from the solution they're so set on, to what is the problem you're trying to solve, what are the potential solutions, and then let's explore them all, as opposed to. So I'm really glad you brought that up. And so I'd love to get your thoughts on, you know, the importance of adaptability, both in life and just in business as well, of course.
So I'll start with business, because the last thing you said sort of triggered a thought. I'm a black belt in Lean Six Sigma. And that whole methodology, sort of the heart of it, is identifying the core problem that you're trying to solve. And so it's using the scientific method to do that, and, you know, defining what the real problem is the first step in that kind of DMAIC, what they call, you know, DMAIC process. Define, measure, and so measurement being part of that, which sometimes is difficult. I think sometimes trying to get the right measurements, what it does, even if you can't get the data and do the measuring, is it slows you down a little bit and forces you to think more deeply about what you're doing. But the last part is, you know, is around the I, is around innovation. And that is, now that I really truly understand what we're trying to fix, whether it's in an entire organization, a particular function, a specific process, whatever it is that you're trying to fix, is figure out what's broken first and do that in a scientific way. Not even just like sitting around chatting about what do you think it is, but, you know, go out and do some focus groups, go out and collect some data around what you think the problem is. And I think it's a very good skill set for anyone to learn early on, is develop some kind of hypotheses about something.
Right.
And about whatever it might be, and then do some hard thinking around that.
Now, sorry, what did you say is this program? Sorry, I didn't catch that.
Yeah, so it's Lean Six Sigma. So, you know, Lean is a methodology that, you know, sometimes they call it the Toyota way. And in manufacturing, Lean Six Sigma is very popular, because in manufacturing, what's really important is figuring out how to create efficiencies in production. And in order to do that, there's a methodology and a way in which you can find out where the real problems are, because typically your solution is a huge capital expenditure. And so you don't want to invest in, let's say, a new piece of serious equipment if the problem is simply a guy is rerouting something the wrong way and everything's breaking, for example.
Right.
So yeah, so it's Lean is often called the Toyota way. It's I based in St. John, New Brunswick, and in my consulting practice, I worked with a lot of family-run businesses. A lot of them involved in manufacturing, food and beverage, and natural resources. And So it was a key part of my consulting practice to be able to not necessarily run these kinds of systems, but to incorporate the key principles around them. And
Sure.
it really, when you have an organization that's focused on solving problems, you already know the benefit of that, as you've talked about. But some organizations have that as their core sort of mantra, and everything they do is based on even their daily work, finding out what the problems were that day and deciding they're going to just fix it. They're going to research a way to do a full sort of investigation around it, or they're going to patch it temporarily before they go out and figure out, if they need to invest any money into finding a solution. And that's at that sort of day-to-day business kind of approach. But
Right.
at the global company approach, Lean Six Sigma as a methodology is about we're going to have people working in our organization and their only job is continuous improvement. And so they teach other people the scientific way. They go out and they look for the most significant and impactful improvement projects in the organization, and they collect all of the data they need to decide, is there really a problem? And that's step one before improvement initiatives actually get in the hopper for the executive team to decide, what are we going to work on this year?
You said a few things here that struck a few chords. So I'm going to have to pick a bunch of these things apart and dig in with some of these, if you don't mind. So the first thing you said that I really liked was identify the core problem. And that is, I mean, that's one of those things I probably spent 3 hours talking to you about, especially being in our industry. We've seen 101 examples of how people do, batch work and patch jobs around fixing little issues instead of finding out the core problem, fixing it at the root. But I'm going to leave that for a minute because I want to talk to you about something else that's important to me. In terms of, I 100% believe that the whole notion of business is business, personal is personal is a bit of a bullshit. At the end of the day, yes, of course, when it comes to business, there's certain differences than how you run your personal life. Absolutely. I'm not saying it's exactly the same, but people are at the core of every business, at least so far. And those people shape those businesses. So nobody can come and tell me that, if you switch Lori for Jack or Ali for Joe, that everything is going to be exactly the same. It's not, because we bring our own personal approach. And so one of the things that's really that's important for me to talk about is you and your personality, because and then one of the, quite frankly, the major reason, like the individuals that I've asked to join us on this podcast are all people that I really respect, of course, for their business and their accomplishments, but also on a personal level. And this idea of identifying the core problem, you would not do that in the business if you were not like that on a personal level. So I want to talk about that because I think it's important. And for a lot of younger individuals who are listening to this, they're not in that position where they're running a billion-dollar production line and they have to identify that problem. But they can practice by identifying their own core problems, by identifying their own core personality issues. We've talked about this with Faydun before. If you feel a certain sense of jealousy or resentment, or if you're negative about something, dig deep, find out where is that coming from? What is the core problem? What is driving that feeling? So I want to talk about that because I think it's important, and I think it starts with you first. If you're not willing to look internally, you're not willing to do the same thing with your business either. It's a character that needs to be in you. The other thing that comes with that, and then I'll shut up and let you speak, is by identifying the problem, you're actually taking responsibility, which is also a massive step in all of this, because a lot of people are really good at pointing out and saying, I told you, I knew this isn't going to work. I told you this isn't going to work. And it's like, yeah, thank you. That's great. That's really helpful. what can we do? Who's going to take responsibility? What's the action we can take?
Absolutely.
And by being willing to identify the core problem, you're also willing to take responsibility for it. And that to me is critical. So I would love to get your thoughts on all of that.
Absolutely. Well, I couldn't agree with you more about the ownership of it. And I think speaking now, sort of talk corporately, I'll speak personally. I think owning your own life and the kinds of results you want to produce in your life, then you've got to take responsibility for deciding what a good life looks like. And I don't think that it is the same for everyone. A lot of people will hand over that actual decision making to what they see around them, which is normal and natural, to see what other people are doing, follow the path that someone else has taken. Looks like it worked out well for them. Maybe it could work out well for me. Or just following in line with a path that seems pretty clear and easy to take. I think for me personally, I don't know that I was wise. I think it was mainly I didn't have any clear path.
Right.
And so when you don't have that, when things aren't really clear, then you may become, or it's easier to become, quite introspective. And so for myself personally, and I think for others, it's useful to dig down and say, what does good look like? And it is related to figuring out, it's not always, what the problem is, it's also what is the opportunity. Right. And so I think from my perspective, there's always both. There's like, what is a problem? I mean, if I'm not looking at externally you could look externally at the world and say, where are the biggest problems in the world and how can I contribute to making those better? I think that's a wonderful exercise. I would love for every young person to do that exercise. But you can look at yourself and say, what does a good life being led look like for me? Which is very hard to do. But I think if you start asking yourself those questions when you're young, you will never stop asking yourself those questions.
100%.
And I think partly too, so I mean, this was always my natural way, but it became even more reinforced in my early 30s when my mom was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease. So it's ALS. I don't know if you're familiar with it, Ali.
I am, yes.
Yeah. And so my family was really just me and my sister and my mom. And my sister lives in Toronto and I'm in New Brunswick. My mom was here and this happened very quickly. I had just bought a building and I was building a new part into my business, ripping apart this building. It was a major expense for me at the time. I was pretty young. I had decided that having a corporate training space with a climbing wall and all kinds of really cool things would be a really nice anchor piece for the community and for my business. And literally the day I signed off on all of the sort of commitments around this, that same week, I found out my mom had Lou Gehrig's disease.
Wow.
I was with her at the time, and in any case, there was a lot going on, and I learned a lot. That was a major demarcation point in my life for learning all kinds of things too. But having those kinds of experience and having to make choice and decision are really important things and we all go through them in different ways. But that was an important sort of point of sort of asking yourself, and I guess kind of there's a whole lot that I could talk about around that, but kind of going back to deciding what a good life looks like, I think you have to first experience death around you and other people and be open to what that means. And that is an uncomfortable topic for a lot of people. It is not for me. I think you learn to live by understanding dying. And that's something I learned through that experience. And after that with my mom, which was by far the most difficult thing I've ever gone through. She ended up being diagnosed in June and she died in November. She came and she moved in. She moved in with me and I was her sort of caregiver. And I had one plant that I couldn't keep alive. As you know, like I was an entrepreneur, I was single. I was not nurturing isn't my natural state of being. So I learned a lot of things about myself too during that, but it was a very difficult time. I became engaged in starting with some other people an ALS society in New Brunswick, which did not exist.
Wow.
And I eventually became the chair of ALS Canada. And it was very important for me to have those kinds of connections in the community. And I think one of the things that, part of this is what drives us as human beings. And for me personally is if I can create something that causes someone else not to have to experience pain and difficulty, whether that, work or personally, that's really important to me. If you can help someone else not have to go through something that you've gone through. And so that was really important for me. And I spent a lot of time with people living with ALS. And I found them to be miraculously some of the most optimistic people that I knew. I learned a lot through those people and through my time there. So I spent 10 years working and volunteering for that organization.
Wow. So you're wow, that's amazing. Truly, Lori, I'm very touched by that. That's that story. That story really resonates with me, and nothing like dealing with the loss of a loved one and health issues for someone so close to really put the rest of life in perspective. And it's a very powerful experience you had, and I mean it's clear. But you said something there. You said it's by experiencing that you can really understand life, and I understand that totally. And in a simple way, I mean, if you've never tasted anything bitter, how can you understand what sweet is? And if you've never tasted failure, success doesn't mean anything. But obviously, your example is the extreme of the extremes, and in terms of what it opens you up to. But it just also creates such an appreciation for what we do, right? Which is also something I want to talk about, because at the core of what we do is embedded a real sense of privilege
Yes.
to even be able to do it, to have the freedom to do it, to have the means, the physical and the mental means to do it, to be in an environment that allows for it. And sometimes, when we get too caught up in the day-to-day activities of running our business, it's easy to lose sight of that. And that's something that I try and talk to, especially anyone that I see in that space. I talk to them like, look, man, this whole thing is a privilege. Like, this is an awesome competition you were partaking in. And when you're dealing with health issues of a loved one or death, those are actual tests. Like having to deliver a product or budgeting issues, like that's just fun stuff. You signed up for that. Don't worry about it. But because you were kind enough to share all of that, can you please also tell me a little bit about the disease? Because for anyone who's not familiar with it, this would be a good way for them to get a bit of familiarity.
Absolutely. Well, most people have heard of the ice bucket challenge. So I have these sort of reference points, and there's a book called Tuesdays with Mori. So these are touch points that I often find are helpful for people to sort of go, oh, okay, yeah, I get I remember what this disease is, but it's a motor neuron disease, and basically signals to your brain to, operate the muscles in your body. They don't make the connection. And so slowly you lose the ability to use all of your muscles. And so for some people it starts with speech and swallowing, and others, and the majority of cases with your legs and your feet and your ability to walk. But ultimately it does end up with muscle failure, and including your lungs and breathing. And so it is a terminal illness. And they say the average life span is 3 to 5 years, although, there people who clearly, like my mom, who are much quicker, and people who the gentleman I started with the ALS Society of New Brunswick with, he was a young man when he was diagnosed. His boys were only 7 and 9 years old. I've just met so many people that are inspiring, and that is an important part of my life too, is I like connecting with people who I feel understand that, living life is multidimensional. There's a lot to it. And you're one of those people, by the way, Ali, for me. And I just really like to be around these people that give you these different perspectives on things. And so anyway, this gentleman, he lived for 12 years. He had made a decision that he wanted to see his boys both graduate from high school, and he did.
Well, that's awesome.
And then he passed away, and that's always amazing to me too, how sometimes that happens.
Am I mistaking? I was just reading actually recently the Stephen Hawking's book. I believe he had the same illness. Am I not mistaken? Yeah,
he did. Yes.
Yeah, and he's one of those exceptional cases where he lived quite a long time with it.
Yes.
Though he was impaired quite a bit.
Yes.
That's a very, very hard illness to deal with, and I'm sorry you went through it, but clearly it's given you this incredible perspective. So it's a prime example of taking something so challenging and so difficult and using it in a positive way. And I really appreciate you sharing that.
I do feel like I must add that for people who are listening, I did not do everything right. I did a lot of things wrong during that time. And, unfortunately, at some point in all of our lives, we're faced with these very difficult choices that we have to make around what to do and how to do it when we have no frame of reference for these things. And so these, as you mentioned, are the really challenging things in life. And I think what I would say to anyone listening that is you'll make the best choice you can at the time. And I would like people to be, I think sometimes people don't stretch outside their comfort zone. In this case, I didn't have a chance, but because they're afraid of making mistakes, and mistakes will be made in life. You will make them, and it's okay. And I think give yourself permission to forgive yourself when you make those mistakes. Feel good about who you are and know who you are, understand your values, what's important to you, and spend time thinking about those things. And it'll be a lot easier for you to stretch outside your comfort zone, make decisions, make mistakes, and still love yourself and move forward.
If you don't mind sharing, can you think of a formative mistake that may be valuable to share with people listening?
Yes, I can. So I'll since we're talking about my mom, for example, like I said I was running, like opening up this business at the same time. I'm not sure I could have done things a lot differently, but I wish that I had found a way to spend more time with her. I was there for her, very functionally. I certainly did the best I could, but I had to make decisions about things that were affecting other people as well in this business I was running. And if I was not an entrepreneur, I would have unplugged myself and committed myself to my mother and her needs and her care. I thought I was going to have 3 years to 5 years because that's what people said, but I ended up with 6 months. And so I have a lot of regret about that.
God, you are the most honest. There's nothing in this world that I love more about human beings than honesty. Like, it's the most beautiful display is for someone to be honest, because to me the honesty is in and of itself is beautiful, but on top of that it displays a certain courage, because you just to tell the truth, even about your mistakes, even about your shortcomings, and not be afraid and share them openly. It's so courageous. But by you saying that, you accomplish exactly what you said earlier, in that by sharing, you allow other people who may be in the same situation to have a better frame of mind for the decisions they're making. But this is absolutely by far my favorite conversation we've had on this podcast. Like, the honesty is truly moving, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, that's what we're here for, and I appreciate the opportunity. I think,
No,
and I think,
it's
go ahead.
it's one of it, I think the honesty, like the honesty in being able to admit something as difficult as that to yourself means that you have no blind spots when it comes to yourself and your character, your capabilities, but also your business. um, and you said something earlier that I wanted to talk to come back to, and kind of relates. You were talking about running in the business and within the manufacturing business, and having constant communication about how the business is run and what's happening. And this honesty goes hand in hand with that communication, because communication is obviously extremely important, but if it's not honest, it's worthless. So the fact that you're as articulate as you are and open to communication, and then super honest about it, I think makes you a very powerful leader. And it allows people to really respect you, to get on the same page with you, and to be able to follow your vision. So how can you, do you have anything that you can relate to in terms of running a business and being able to really openly discuss things with people, bring them on board, sharing the vision, and then and it doesn't have to be necessarily the business, because, like, to me, the ALS community that you started is a prime example of that. And in my mind, it takes a way higher place than any business, because with the businesses we all have so much to gain, and like financially and whatnot, but with the charities, and as you know, I have someone very close to me who's deeply involved in their own charitable endeavors. That to me is always what I'm the most happy about by far. So I'd love to get your thoughts on some of that stuff.
Yeah, a couple of things. I'm a big believer in vision, purpose, values, kind of principles foundationally. One of my businesses, we actually conducted sort of, mastermind kind of groups. It was called the Power Sites Mastery Network, and we had business leaders come together, and we helped them develop, this tool set, which is very common. But a lot of cases it requires sort of talking through things, like to sit down and write your vision, or to write your values, or what sort of your core principles to live by, or what your ideal day could look like, or your future. And all these things are very deep thinking experiences, and so we facilitated these discussions and help people to create these documents and have these kind of words to help make decisions in life. And of course, I did go through the same process myself. And about every I'm nowhere near like you, Ali. I don't have like the consistent gene. I'm like, I get this. I write, and I look back actually at 2004, my vision, my values. I somehow miss, and about every 4 years I go back and personally update what that means to me. And I early in my career used to facilitate strategic planning sessions for businesses, which of course businesses also have visions, and they have values, and they have purpose, and they have guiding principles and strategic objectives. And and I kind of sort of emulate my own personal, the way I like to live my life, and the way I think
Right.
business looks. They're different but the same.
Right.
But
100%.
to your point, they all, the only way any of that works is if you're being completely honest with what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way it really works is if you actually, I think it works a lot better if you talk about it with people.
You have to. I mean, communication is at the very core of it, and something that for me is very clear is a lot of times there's discussions around communicating with others, finding problems, but everything starts with the self, and that's one of the big things that now we've been fortunate enough to talk to you about, is that the honesty starts with yourself, the communication starts with yourself, finding problems starts with yourself, and those are all things that you have to do, and especially when you're younger, like, because a lot of times you'll speak to somebody and they start getting dismissive, but they're like, well, I'm not the CEO of some company, I don't need to do these things. Like, no, you're the CEO of you, though. You need to
Yes,
run you first. Like, if you
that's true.
can't, like, people talk about, like, oh, who gives a shit if my room is clean or not? Well, no, you're right, it doesn't really matter if your room is clean, but let's be real. Like, I mean, how good are you going to be at cleaning up like $1 billion business when you really can't manage your socks? Like, come on, like, like, I'm
Yeah,
not, so it's one of those things, like, it starts with the self, and then a lot of times people think, oh, well, I'll do that when I get there, I'll be organized when I'm running a company. No, you won't be. You need to start now, you need to start doing it now. So all this stuff that you've talked about, which I found so important and so touching and so critical to possess as qualities, the honesty, the problem solving, the communication, they all start with you. And it doesn't matter if you're 20 years old or 22 years old and you're not running a company, you're still running your own life and you have to be responsible for it. So I always want to just remind everyone that, look, it doesn't matter if these things apply in a business setting to you or
yeah,
not, because they all apply to you on a personal level. And if you
abs-
get that stuff in line when you're running a business, you'll be able to carry them out effectively.
agreed. Really important.
Um, we usually don't have any kind of a time limit, and we just talk. I know we've taken quite a bit of your time, and I'm trying to be mindful of it. But me personally, I'm not in any kind of a rush, and I'm truly enjoying learning from you and getting to know you better. And I cannot thank you enough for sharing as openly as you have. But there's a few things that I've just highlighted that are, I really think are as important a lesson as has come up. The honesty with yourself and everyone around you, finding core problems, and communicating and solving them, taking responsibility for them. These are just such critical fundamental qualities that I feel like if that's all you repeat to yourself every day, then you're good. If you remind yourself of that every day and you stick by those few things, I think you're good. And just have a little bit of discipline to do a little bit every day. That's
I
it.
I am definitely a fan of all those things, and I think the more you can nurture yourself in your youth and when things are good, it will pay off for you when you really need it the most. And
Um,
that's an investment that you need to make in yourself for your future self. So I really don't think it's too soon to start making that investment, not only in your thinking, but also in your doing. To your point
right,
around execution, I think part of what allows me to feel contentment, people talk about happiness. I don't strive for it. I'll go for content. But I think you've got to develop really good behaviors when you're younger around
100%.
exercise and eating and sleeping and all of these things, because I spend a lot of time talking to people who are looking for the magic elixir around how to be healthy or how
Right,
to be better financially or how to, and my perspective on it is it's not that difficult.
right,
I think we all know what we need to do. And the more you can start getting those behaviors as part of who you see yourself as when you're younger, the more you do a behavior, the more it becomes part of your identity. Start now. Do not wait. They're easy things. You just have to do them and do them consistently. And like I said earlier, Ali, I don't do it as consistently as you,
No,
but
I'm not ready to. I mean, look, I actually think what I'll disagree with you there. You said they're not hard, but they kind of are. Like for whatever reason, people have a hard time embracing these little things they need to do every day. Like someone said it really trivially to me, and it really stuck a chord with me. Like, I'm obsessive with my eating and stuff. I try and be disciplined about it. But someone said, like, how can you not control what you put in your mouth? And like when they phrased it that way, I was like, you know what? You're right. Like, it's so weird how many people go every day where they don't control what they put in their mouth. They, like, end of the day, yeah, I had this cake, even though I wasn't supposed to. I drank this stuff. I didn't. Well, you put it in your own mouth, man. Like, I mean, control your basic actions. If you can't control your basic time you go to sleep, the basic time you wake up, the basic food you put in your body, I mean, what hopes do you have of doing the bigger stuff?
But I think you're right. I don't think it's, like I said, it's not hard, but I think it's complex emotionally for people. And so the more you can just make it a habit,
Right.
the easier it is when it's harder to do.
100%. And I'll take it one step further, and I'll say, like, go back to what you were saying in terms of identifying the core problems. A lot of times people don't do these things because they want to give themselves an excuse for failure. Like they think like, oh, you know what, if I don't succeed, then I can look back and blame the fact that I didn't work out, I didn't do this, I didn't do that, like whatever the goal may be, right? If you make something easy as like losing weight or getting fit, then they give themselves that excuse, thinking like, if I fail, I'll have that excuse so I don't have to feel bad about the failure. Whereas like, I go back to another thing you were saying earlier in terms of like trying and failing and embracing it and understanding and learning it. So what? Just do your best, and if you fail, you fail. You get better, you learn more. Like, don't worry about it. Like, don't self-sabotage yourself by not doing all the right things. Do the right things. Invest the small amount of time it takes for you to get your routine in order. Be disciplined about things. And it's exactly what you said. You just don't get your financial situation in order in one step. It's the accrual of all these small steps. And it's the development of these great habits over time. So, Lori, I could not agree with you more. I feel like we've taken a ton of your time, but I also feel like I have to ask you to join us more, because this was such an awesome conversation, and I feel like we're leaving a lot to still be discussed. But I don't want to impose too much on your time for the one episode today. But you have been so gracious, and I appreciate you sharing as openly as you did. And like I said, this has been one of my absolute favorite conversations. So thank you for it. Just to do a quick recap, even though I've done it a few times, I'll do it one more time. Identify the core problems, be completely honest, take responsibility, and then communicate effectively. Develop the habits, small steps over time, and build on those small steps. And that's what I took away from your stories and you sharing with me, and I love every one of them, and I find them invaluable. So thank you, Lori.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, and thank you for the gift that you're giving to all these people who are following podcasts.
You're very kind. You're very kind. This was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. Happy New Year to you. All the best for 2021 and onwards. And hopefully, I keep saying this, I'm optimistic we'll be able to do these in person in the future. We'll see.
I look forward to it, and very nice. Thank you, Braden. Bye.
Take care.
My pleasure.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Take care.